the project on history. He is an historian of science technology, but also science and technology in the international relations. For this is session, he will present an intervention about the role, the historical role of science attaché. This is a very nice research because, as you know, for instance, Italian government since 2019 up to today has passed from 22 to more than 60 science and space attaché. In the sense that for Italian government, scientific diplomacy became more and more relevant. Only a number, I think, but the United States has about 250 scientific personnel around the US embassies. But in this case, we have in the room Pier Bruno. He's an author of the present day of the attaché, scientific attaché in the present day. But now the floor is for Leonard. And I advance that this intervention is very nice because give us several elements very interesting also for today. Grazie.
Thank you so much, David. And thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure. So good morning, everyone, dear colleagues, dear students. So yes, thank you, David, for the introduction and for setting the scene. I'm going to talk about a rather small group of people, so-called science attachés. And I will embark you in a journey from the 19th to the mid-20th century, mainly in France, but we will travel abroad in Peru, Germany, the Ottoman Empire, etc. I will briefly introduce the topic and explain what is a science attaché today, as David has started to do. And then I will move from one motivation to another, which convinced or which fueled debates from the 1870s onwards about the opportunity to have science attachés in French embassies abroad. So the first motivation was to better access the fields of research abroad. The second then was to help organize international science. And then in the 1950s, after the Second World War, another motivation came. It was about informing state bureaucracy about developments abroad in terms of science and technology. And then I will conclude. So what is a science attaché to start with? Well, this is the person you tend to think first about when you envision the relation today between science and diplomacy. I don't know if maybe we can move this Zoom bar. So, okay.
No, it's with the right one. Yes.
Maybe here. Don't know. We'll see. And can I?
Yes.
Good. Is it better? This self.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
So when Lorenzo Melchor tried to establish a science diplomat taxonomy, he put first in his list the science counselors and attachés. A science attaché is an agent assigned, attached. Attaché is a loan word in English, coming from French. An agent assigned, attached to a diplomatic mission. It can be accredited as a member of the diplomatic staff or not. A diplomatic mission, as the convention, the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relation dating from 61, puts it, is made of a diplomatic staff plus administrative staff plus service staff. And the attaché can be part of the diplomatic staff in a diplomatic mission, or sometimes part of the administrative staff. And the science attaché is the one with an expertise on science and technology. So he's the one who has to deal with bilateral or multilateral scientific and technological relations. Today, I have to play with this. I don't know, how can we? This one? Or
No.
can I reduce?
No.
There is no way. Okay, this way maybe. Today, Italy has a fast network expansion of science attaché, addetti scientifici, worldwide. So from 19 in 2019 to 60 in 2024. So I told you it's a rather small group of people. At the end, it's about 60 people in the case of Italy. France, we call them attachés scientifiques et techniques, or sometimes they have the title of a counselor or attaché de coopération universitaire et scientifique. And Pierre Bruno made a review, an inquiry, and he saw that we have, in 2019, we had 71 science and technology attachés worldwide in the French diplomatic network, plus 5 counselors, and this scattered around 62 countries. That's the situation today, more or less. My talk is about the history of the network. And I have to say that we know very little about this history. We have very few elements about the development of the network. We even are not sure of the date, precise date of when the first science attaché was posted abroad. The literature, if to say, this is a big word because there are very few elements on the history of the science attaché network. But what we know, there is an hesitation between 55 or 63 as the date when the first science attachés were appointed abroad. And what we know is that the network grew very fast during the 70s and 80s, so that the French network of science attachés abroad was one of the largest networks in the world. So it seems that the French diplomatic apparatus invested a lot in this expertise in the 70s and 80s. But again, the historiography is very, very thin. There is even not an article on the topic. And it's very much in contrast with where we have articles and books about the attaché with an expertise in the military. And the military attaché, the first ones were appointed in the 19th century, 1850, around 1850. Then came the naval attaché, and here again we have books and articles. Then came the financial attaché and the commercial attaché during and after the First World War. Books again. And then the cultural attaché and counselors. Again, we know them quite well. And there is a series of other attachés in embassies. You can find agricultural attaché, you can find health, nuclear, agricultural, I've said, Olympic attaché recently, and others. Well, in this talk today, I will not so much talk about the expansion of the network, so from the 1950s to the 1980s or the end of the 20th century. I will talk about the prehistory, the period when there was no science attaché in the French diplomatic network, but there were debates. There were debates about the opportunity to appoint science attaché abroad. And that's very interesting to review these debates, to see what were the arguments, what was in favor of having such an expert in the embassy abroad, or what was against having such an expert. And I found that the first debate on this happened in 1879, 78, 79. So really far back in time. And the motivation was then, again, to secure access to distant fields of investigation. I will explain. And this debate repeated again and again in the 80s, 90s, and resurfaced during the war, the First World War, but with a new element in it. There was a new dimension in the debate on the opportunity to have a science attaché. The question then was not so much about access, but also, and above all, about helping to organize international science, to organize international collaborations among allies. And then after the Second World War, there was a new input to create science attachés, and it finally reached something, became materialized. We had science attaché appointed, be it in 55 or in 63. And the new dimension, which added up on the top of the others, was to inform a new state bureaucracy in charge of research. So I will go through these three stages, and this will, well, in a way, allow us to understand better the motivations that evolved and accumulated over time to create a science attaché network. But it will also, the debates themselves, they will illuminate the long-term transformative interplay between science and diplomacy. There were debates because there were connections. So there were no science attaché, but there were deep relations, connections. And the debate in itself shows this. So let's go to the first occurrence so far. So far, I haven't spotted any debate on the opportunity to have a science attaché before 1878, 79. Quote, the Public Instruction Ministry should ask to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs the title of science attaché to the legations for the travelers in mission, whether free or paid, science attaché. This is a quote from 1879. In fact, the book was printed in 79, but these are minutes from a discussion that took place in 78, 1 year before. In which context? In the context of the first meeting of all the associations, the French associations of geographers, which met in Paris in the brand new seat of the Geographical Society of Paris, the oldest of the geographical societies. You see, it's in a nice hotel in Boulevard Saint-Germain, which is still the seat of the Geographical Society today. And there was a meeting of all geographers and people interested in geography, in knowing better the Earth. And in 78, sorry. And during this meeting, they discussed, these scientists, the opportunity to appoint science attachés. So what did they mean for scientists in mission or travelers in mission, whether free or paid? They referred to a particular system that I would like to explain, a system of state sponsorship of scientific missions abroad. So in 1842, the French state, the French government, devised a system to sponsor scientists willing to go abroad. They sponsored them whether giving funds, money, and this is the paid mission, or just giving the stamp. This is governmental. There is a governmental support to this guy who is going here and there to inquire, to acquire new knowledge. So the proposal was to give the title of science attaché to the legations, meaning to the embassies or consulates abroad, to these travelers, to these scientific missions, individual or collective, that had received the stamp from the government. And again, from this discussion, there was a formal proposal. Okay, the streaming, it's okay, but for the audience, they issued a formal request. The Société Géographique de Paris wrote a letter to the Foreign Affairs Ministry to invite him to create for the accredited travelers a title analog to military attaché or naval attaché. You see the point. Who was precisely behind this? Geographers, I said, yes, but one of them in particular, the one who launched the debate in 78 was Charles Wiener. Charles Wiener was a young Austrian born linguist, geographer, ethnographer, archaeologist. There are no clear separation at the time between disciplines, of course. And this Charles Wiener obtained a state-sponsored scientific mission in 75 to Bolivia and Peru to acquire knowledge about the Andes, about the ancient history of this region and the geography of this region. So he left with a lot of money from the government. It was a paid mission. And he left for 2 years in Bolivia and Peru Here is a picture that he took himself during the travel. And he is the one who asked for first. Wiener was very clever at self-promotion. So as soon as he came back in Paris in 1977, he wrote a book, Peru et Bolivie, where he narrates his travel, his trip. It's a 600 book, massive book that he wrote to have him known from the public, but also to say to the world that he was the first one to be there. There was an American mission going at the same place just 1 year after, and he was keen to print first. In this book, you can find drawings by Wiener himself, and here you can see him excavating a cliff, and from this kind of excavations, he collected, we know, 5 tons of artifacts, including human remains, which were sent through the governmental navy to Paris. And this collection of artifacts is at the basis of what is today the Quai Branly Museum. It is in the collections nowadays in the Quai Branly Museum of Ethnography. Incidentally, Wiener was so famous by the time, and even during the early 20th century, that his expeditions inspired Hergé when he created the stories of Tintin, this famous cartoon. Some of the adventures of Tintin were inspired by Wiener, we know that. Wiener received the support of all the people in the audience. They all agreed that it was a very, very good idea to ask for accreditation, to be, when you are abroad, to be a science attaché. Preeminent scientists in the room supported and backed his proposal. I don't name them, but they were the first geographers, anthropologists, ethnographers, linguists of the time at the head of institutions in Paris and in France. What was the motivation then? Well, it was to secure access to investigation fields. The status of science attaché, the proposal is not clear if they wanted to be accredited or not as diplomats per se, but the status of science attaché for them would have provided a series of benefits. The first was to have full and automatic support from French consuls and diplomats abroad. If you have the status of a science attaché to an embassy, then you can expect that the consul and the ambassador abroad will support you, which was not always the case. Second, this would provide more autonomy and legitimacy in relation with local authorities. So the governments abroad, the municipal authorities abroad would recognize you as a legitimate, even more legitimate scientist to excavate in the cliffs, to dig in the ground, to do your research. And to have this would facilitate support from the local authorities. And maybe also this would give immunity attached to the diplomatic status. You know, there are immunities. And this could be interesting in relation with not so much the local authorities, but the local population. So the idea was to immunize maybe the scientist when he's doing his research abroad. It proved to be quite dangerous sometimes to dig in the ground, not because of, or to go in the cliffs, not because of, not only because of the potential injuries, etc., but because of the population and the local population, which could be against the fact that you take human remains. And it was the case for Wiener, who had to fight local population. We have a report from him while he was in mission, where he wrote, there was a resistance from indigenous who use every means possible to prevent the formation of these collections. This is not in this book, in his book. He doesn't talk about that, but in his private report to the founders, he explained that he had many difficulties. Another geographer who was in the room in 78 made a map called Afrique nécrologique, where he put the name of all the geographers, all the explorers from France who had died while in mission, while in scientific mission. So it was dangerous, and having diplomatic immunity could be interesting. What was the result? Well, the French Foreign Affairs Ministry did not support the proposal. He rejected the proposal to give the title of science attaché. Why? I have found a note on the proposal, an handwritten note from the cabinet of the minister in 79, where they write, this wish is not practical. Even the honorary title of attaché to a diplomatic post, honorary meaning not accredited as a diplomat, can only be conferred on a person who is established in the residence of a mission and not on a traveler. Letters of recommendation are always granted, by the way, and that's enough. For the French Foreign Affairs Ministry, they already did enough in providing letters of recommendation to the travelers. It was not useful and not practical, as they said, to do more. What happened to Wiener? Well, we know that this same year, he was appointed as vice consul, so not as a science attaché, but he entered the diplomatic career as a vice consul appointed in Ecuador. There, he performed diplomatic duties as a vice consul, but at the same time, he followed on his research, and he continued to send artifacts to French museums. So Wiener went from a scientific career with a diplomatic dimension to a diplomatic career with a scientific dimension. What are the lessons from this episode? Well, first, in spite of repeated debates, this debate repeated again and again in the following years. In China, Ottoman Empire, there were initiatives from scientists asking for this status, just for this reason. But in spite of repeated debates, no formal science attaché was appointed in a French diplomatic network. But this did not mean no relation between science and diplomacy. On the contrary, the debate around the key issue of access illuminates a strong and mutually shaping interplay. That's key that's a key argument for me. The debate shows that there were relations, and the relations transformed each part. So the fact that diplomacy was in contact with science transformed both diplomacy and science. Diplomats supported through letters of recommendation, through the emission of passports, but also oriented the rise of what is called field sciences. And field sciences is something new in the 19th century. It's a major evolution of science, of the meaning and practice of science in the 19th century. And diplomacy was really connected to this change. It supported it, it oriented it in a way. There were 2,300 state-sponsored missions in between 42 and 1914. So it's rather big move of scientists abroad, receiving passports, letters of recommendation, local support from the embassies, from the consulates abroad. On the other hand, field scientists not only helped to achieve, but also participated to the social construction of foreign policy objectives assigned to diplomats. Their quest of knowledge received state support because scientists argued that their quest was key and to secure access to natural resources, to foreign markets, to artifacts, to field museums. So going back to the debate yesterday we had on the social construction of national interests, here I say that the field scientists were part of the construction of new national interests and diplomatic objectives. This contact zone between science and diplomacy was populated with scientists in mission. We have seen that. We also had scientists in military expeditions. You maybe know that. We also had consuls and diplomats at embassies performing scientific activities, as Wiener did for some years. And you could also find so-called French school abroad, École française abroad. So when you think about the issue of access, which fueled the debate about having a science attachés, then you see that there were many arrangements, many dispositive schemes to secure access. Scientists in missions, scientists in military expeditions, consul diplomats doing science abroad, but also particular forms of scientific presence abroad and influence abroad, the schools. Schools, you had a school in Rome, maybe you know it in Italy. Archaeologists managed to have a École Française in Rome to do excavations in Rome. But the same when in Athens, in Cairo, in Indochina, there were four such schools abroad at the beginning of the 20th century. And Rasmus always remind me that there were also other forms of scientific presence abroad from France, and namely higher education ventures. And in this respect, we can mention the Faculté française de médecine et de pharmacie de l'Université Saint-Joseph de Beyrouth, which was formed in 1883, which too facilitated access to French scientists in this region. A second period started during the war, when the question became more about having science attaché to better organize international science at war and at peace. Here there is a newspaper clip, a newspaper article dating from March 1919, just after the First World War, which says, it's in French, it says, the American press announces the appointment of Mr. Mendenhall, professor of physics at the University of Wisconsin, as scientific attaché to the American embassy in London. We asked Mr. Paul Painlevé, former Minister of Inventions, about the advisability of sending scientific attachés to friendly governments. And the response from Mr. Painlevé, who was a minister during the war, there were science attachés at the Ministry of Inventions. Well, we'll see that yes and no, there were and there were not science attachés during the war. Painlevé, you have his picture here, was a mathematician, a contemporary of Volterra in Italy, who used to be Minister of Instruction and Inventions. That was a new portfolio in the French government during the war. So a scientist who turned to politics, became a member of the government, and he was the one who organized in Paris a committee, an inter-allied committee for the inventions useful to the war effort. So this was a committee where scientists from Italy, Great Britain, the US, and France, and others could discuss the advancements in science and technology which could be useful at some point to the war effort. So it was part of the big machinery of scientific mobilization during the war. And to participate to this inter-allied committee for inventions useful to the war effort in Paris, set up by Paul Painlevé, Italy, the UK, the US sent science attachés to their embassies. So scientists with the title of science attaché. I don't remember the name of the Italian. Maybe you remember, David, because you have worked on one Italian science attaché, but sent to Washington, not to Paris.
Yes.
You wrote one of the very few chapters on this topic.
Yes. This was Giorgio Abetti. In Paris, we have a professor from the Milan Polytechnic named outside of the network of Vito Volterra, and the other one was in London, a chemical specialist named under the control and the direction of Vito Volterra.
So this is the Italian case. You have the case of the UK, the case of the US, who sent in their different capital cities science attaché. But strangely enough, the French government, who accredited foreign science attaché, did not send science attaché in itself. The French government did not appoint science attaché abroad, to my deception. I would have liked that to find at the end a few science attaché, but no. What Paul Painlevé did was to, under his leadership, to send scientific missions again abroad, in the UK, in Russia, in the USA, in Italy, but to do the same thing, to coordinate scientific mobilization within the Allies, to accelerate the circulation of critical technologies, and critical knowledge. At the end of the war, the discussion started again on whether or not to continue this program of science attaché. 3 inter-allied, again, conferences took place between October 1918 and July 1919 that were meant to set up a completely new scientific landscape internationally. It's in this framework, just end of the war time frame, that they the Allies and set up the International Research Council, which has become nowadays the International Science Council. This council was supposed to supervise disciplinary unions, so international scientific unions like the International Astronomical Union. And the key aspect of this reorganization of international science was the exclusion of German, Austrian, and Central Power scientists. So the scientists coming from the enemy's countries were banned from these unions. This was the beginning of scientific sanctions that we know today. And in this context, during these conferences, the Allies, which were mainly scientists, head of national academies, discussed the opportunity to have science attachés in embassies, in their mutual embassies, to monitor this new landscape and to foster international cooperation among them. This is in this context that the paperclip from 1919 came from. But, and here you have a picture of the American physicist Charles Elwood Mendenhall, who happened to be science attaché in London for just 6 months in 1919. So in the context of the reorganization of international science, the science attaché that were created during the war was a little bit prolonged or extended after the war. But rather soon, rather quickly, the program was interrupted, both in Italy, as well as in the UK, as well as the US. And I don't know, and we don't know why at this stage. So this is research in progress. I have to work on that. But as I have said, the French position was rather strange in this context, as they did not have any science attaché abroad. The question is why? Why this strange position of France? Was it again the Foreign Affairs Ministry who resisted? Maybe, I don't know. It could be. It could be that again, the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs said, this is not practical, this is not a good idea for some reasons. One reason being that the ministry itself evolved at the beginning of the 20th century and created a department to monitor international cooperations of all sorts. So in the technical field, but also in the scientific field. The central administration of the ministry was reorganized in 1907 with a new subdirectorate for international unions, comprising international scientific unions. And I have worked on this department it had 3 priorities. And these priorities sometimes conflicted with the priorities of the scientists. So maybe that's a reason why they did not want to have science attachés. The priorities were to have French as the official language in any arena, to be sure that Paris was promoted as a seat for any international organization to be created. And the last stake was to coordinate French delegations. Because sometimes scientists, they took strange directions that conflicted with the views of the Foreign Affairs Ministry. So maybe it was the Foreign Affairs that resisted, or maybe it's a choice that came from the scientific side. I don't know. Maybe they preferred to be autonomous in their monitoring of international science. Lessons: in spite of discussions and initiatives from allied and associated countries, which posted science attachés in Paris during and after the war, there was no formal science attaché appointed in the French diplomatic network. But again, no science attaché did not mean no relation between science and diplomacy. On the contrary, the debate on this time, the issue of organization of international science, illuminates a strong and mutually shaping interplay. On the one hand, diplomacy was involved in organizing international science. I haven't described this, but all the congresses that took place at the end of the 19th century, they involved in a way or in another the French Foreign Affairs Ministry. Sometimes diplomats participated to the negotiations of international conventions, like the one for the International Association of Geodesy that was created in 1962. And diplomacy was involved, of course, in the interallied conferences that I mentioned. So diplomacy was part of the organization of international science. In other words, international science took the shape it took because diplomats participated in it too. On the other hand, international organization of science contributed to the reform of the central administration of the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 1907, as I mentioned. So the science transformed diplomacy in a way. And when you think in terms of international organization of science, then you see other contacts, other ways to handle the relation between science and diplomacy than the science attachés. You will find representatives delegated at the International Research Council. You will find the president of the international unions. It's not a coincidence that out of 8 unions that were created in 1919, 8, so all of them were presided by a Frenchman. And this guy had a clear scientific and diplomatic mission. It's in organizing international science. So no science attaché, but people in charge of this go-between science and diplomacy. And there are other people involved in international organization of science doing an in-between role, such as the head or the representatives to the International Institute of Intellectual Cooperation. Marie Curie, for instance, was the French representative to the International Institute of Intellectual Cooperation. And we know that before going to the meeting of the institute, she went to the Foreign Affairs Ministry to be briefed. And then she adjusted between her own desires and views and the views of the government. So no science attaché, but many people doing this role of go-between. Last, and I will be briefer because I haven't worked so much on this so far. The last motivation came after the Second World War to have science attachés. And it was not about so much access or only about access or about playing an active role in organizing international science. It was also and mostly about informing a new state bureaucracy. I can't tell you at this point whether or not the first science attaché was appointed in Berlin in 55 or in 63 in Washington. But what I can tell you for sure is that these people had a new mission. They had to facilitate access. They had to monitor the international scientific landscape, but they above all have to inform Paris about scientific opportunities and threats coming from abroad. And informing Paris meant in particular informing the new delegation for scientific research, which was created in 58. So this is a turning point in the political history of France from the 4th to the 5th Republic. And then you had a delegation for scientific research, which is just taking this topic, research, as a political issue, as an object of public policy. The delegation is building science and research as a topic, yes, of public policy. And the first delegate was Pierre Pigagnol, you have a picture of him, who was a scientist in charge for about 10 years of this delegation. And the delegation proved formative and very influential in having the first science attachés posted. So why was information so crucial? We have an example of the importance of extracting information from abroad from the CNRS mission to occupied Germany, a mission that was dispatched between 45 and 50, 5 years. It comprised up to, I think, more than 50 scientists sent to Germany to take back some equipments that the occupiers had taken from France, but also to extract knowledge. And here we have a quote from the head of the CNRS mission. And that's a bit harsh. Listen, our policy towards German scientists should be to extract from them as much information as possible about the new ideas they have had, the results they have achieved, and the methods they have used to achieve these results. Consider them as milk cows to be abandoned after milking. So the point was not to collaborate with German scientists. The point was not to have German scientists taken to France, as the US did. The point was to extract information. And this was very important in the following years. I have interviewed one of the first science attachés who is still alive. He is in his hundreds. Michel Fabre de la Ripelle was sent to Japan, so not the first one, but maybe the second or third science attaché sent by the delegation for scientific research. He was sent to Japan from 64 to 68. He told me, and I looked at his paper too, that the mission was unclear. He had no strict guideline when he was sent to Japan. But in practice, when you look at what he did, day-to-day practice, well, he facilitated access for ethnographers, linguists, people interested in knowing better Japan. He developed international cooperation with Japan. So this is the Organization of International Science. And above all, he informed Paris and the Delegation for Scientific Research about higher education, research, and development, including in the private sector in Japan. So from his practice, we can see that information was key. And my point is that information was key because there was a new state bureaucracy in the making that wanted to build national research. And to build national research, you have to get information from abroad. That's one of the ingredients. Conclusion. The motivations to create science attaché evolved through time and somehow accumulated over time. These represent sorts of hidden roots of the large science attaché network that emerged from the 50s onwards. Understand me correctly, I don't want to be deterministic. This is not because there were discussions in the end of the 19th century, not because there was discussions during the First World War, that it was a necessity to have science attachés from the 50s onwards. But these were ingredients and for sure motivations that accumulated over time. What we've seen along the journey is that the scientists, the scientific world was much more in demand of science attachés than diplomats. It were the scientists who asked again and again to have this title, to have these people in the embassies for different reasons, but not the diplomats. And it's still, I think, something relevant today. All the Italian scientists who are posted in the embassies abroad, well, the diplomats, they are not always very aware or even happy with such people in their embassy. They don't know what to do with them. Maybe I exaggerate, but still it's rather a demand, a push from the scientists than the reverse. And I hope I have shown that the debates reveal some long-term historical links and frictions between science and diplomacy. There were no science attachés, but many attachments, I would say, between science and diplomacy. And across these attachments, through these attachments, the meaning and the practice of science and the practice and the meaning of diplomacy co-evolved. That's something to be, that's a key takeaway from my research, I think. Thank you.
Okay, now we have some minutes for the question, if you have. Okay. 2, 3 questions, 4 questions. But during this workshop, we presented sometime sometimes for students, and particularly master students, we present perhaps exotic subject. But which is the idea? The idea is that you may link this subject with, or in our case, the evolution of European construction process. One question, but European Union has had science attaché, or for international science and history, international history of science and technology, okay, but how was the impact of this is attaché during the First World War? Why this question? Because we know that the Comité des Inventions, the Inventions Committee in Paris, had a very little impact, only about one new invention, tank. I have seen the documents. In the other end, you have an industrial, environmental, an industrial establishment. You have industry very active. And today, maybe the same things. You have, in the present crisis, not only the governmental establishment interested in innovation during the war, but also films and industry. This is only one example, but of a possible point to reflect, starting from history by arriving to present day. Now, Pier Bruno, then Rasmus, Carlo, and Alessio.
Thank you very much, Leonard. I think this is really an important research that you are doing. To my knowledge, there is nothing equivalent for any other country that is investigating from a historical point of view the emergence of the figure of the scientific attaché that doesn't exist. And this is very enlightening. I will make maybe 2 or 3 comments on that. I like, of course, you recall by the end the idea that scientists are in demand more than diplomats. This is a topic that we already discussed. Putting it in a different wording, we could say that science diplomacy is much more supply-driven than demand-driven. And this has consequences, as you mentioned, on the training of science diplomats, the training of career diplomats to science diplomacy in particular. If we start from the idea that they are not in demand as such, this is an interesting point. Another very interesting point of your presentation is this idea that science diplomacy leads to a transformation of science on one side and of diplomacy on the other side. I like very much this idea that both those spheres that are said to be rather independent to one to each other at the beginning, how each of those spheres may change their practices when interacting with the other sphere. Now, my main comment is about this. Yesterday, I tried to explain what I call the mainstream vision of science diplomacy, the one which was put forward some 15 years ago. And remember that emphasizes a lot the search for cooperation, the goal of fulfilling common interest, the role of scientific cooperation in enhancing peace, those very positive objectives. And this is said to be science diplomacy in the contemporary understanding. Then, not only when listening what you said, Leonard, this morning, but when I read what historians say about relationship between science and diplomacy in the long run, this is a different story. The story is different. What did you explain? You explained that the scientific attachés, the French scientific attaché, they came up with a motivation that was to access the field, to help scientists, to help French scientists to access the field. No idea of cooperation in that. National interest, unilateral projection of the French interest in Africa and other places during the colonial situation. Another thing that you highlight, you historians, is the role, the importance of the organization of science at the international level. You mentioned that the role just after the First World War, for instance, of the International Organization of Science, and the role that states, the interest that states had themselves in seeing the scientific community organize itself in the best possible way. This topic is totally absent of discussion about science diplomacy in the contemporary meaning. We never read anything about that. Only historians point on this, on the importance of this aspect. So what you explained this morning, it illustrates once again the gap that exists between the way we understand science diplomacy in the mainstream vision and what historians have to say. And you highlight motivations which are not very much cooperative motivations. Your third period, when you speak about informing, the importance of the informing mission. Informing is access again. This is the access motivation, not the cooperation motivation. I was really struck when listening to your presentation that this cooperation motivation, which seems to be so important in the mainstream vision, is not very important in the history of the emergence of science attaché in France. So this is my comment.
You may ask for this.
Thank you, Pierre Bruno, for the elaborated comments. Put in perspective, just.
Rasmus, we take the comments and the questions.
Yes, thank you very much, Leonard. Very interesting. Yesterday, when Pierre Bruno was speaking about the French science attachés, Pierre Bruno, you emphasized that it was often connected to culture, and that the French diplomatic thinking was influenced through culture. And Leonard, I noticed here that you said at one point there was an aim of French as scientific language, how do you say, international scientific headquarters in Paris and conferences. And of course, it reminds me of my old Briand vote that you have seen many times. Yeah, so Leonard, I was curious about what traces you see in your material of what Pierre Bruno was talking about yesterday, how the science attaché, at least today, if I understand you correct, Pierre Bruno, is often connected to the cultural section, cultural idea. And then I'm curious about if you have any impression on the, how to say, the demand side from the host country, what they are interested in. And actually, Pierre Bruno, I think for France, this focus on language and culture, I think it's rational. Because I'm trying to think about what, in my experience, attracts foreigners to France and French education, etc. So in my own case, in high school in Denmark, I basically discovered la francophonie. And that's what made French interesting for me, that French was an alternative globalization. And as a PhD student, later as a guest researcher, I spent years in Paris. And when I think about the foreign PhD students and other young academics I met in Paris from all over the world, they are often attracted to that, how to say, alternative globalization, that La Francophonie and France, it's the only non-Anglophone, how to say, global approach. And then also, I came to think about a conversation I had with a very high-ranking Indian military officer some time ago. And India buys, for example, submarines from France. And he made a remark why India buys French defense equipment. And it's basically because India wants access to Western military technology without being dependent on the United States. So both, how to say, in the cultural field, in the defense technology field, etc., I suspect that on the demand side, people see France as this alternative to the Anglosphere. And that is basically what makes France attractive. Yeah, so what I'm just picking at is a bit of dialogue between Pierre Bruno's remark about the cultural section yesterday and Leonard, what traces you see in your material about this linking science to culture and influence through culture and language. Thank you.
Thank you, Rasmus. Shall I respond?
We have another question from Carlo.
This is again, and so yeah, very nice comments and questions that were before me. In particular, you know, the unilateral attitude to the function of science, and everybody in this business is probably not only by France but also by the other powers that were adopting a very selfish attitude in any operation, not cooperative. So I liked very much your comment. And my question is very simple. It is, so especially in the 19th century, how the science attaché were chosen. So it was just for personal knowledge, or they were just famous people, or there was already there a structure in science that the ministry or diplomat could interface with and have some choices, possible choices recommended by this organization? Thank you.
Thanks.
Alessio Rocci. Thank you for the very beautiful talk. I would like to go back to what Pierre Bruno said about this in the first period you were speaking about, when we have this record of the fact that there were problems in accepting the interaction between the scientific and the diplomatic domain. And I would like to know more about all this motivation that contrasted, because it seems, well, it was very disappointing to know about the idea of the loyalty, the problem of loyalties that they have. It seems to me that it was contrasting with the idea of scientific freedom in general. Maybe how was the perception at the time? And yet, that was not about scientific collaboration, but this idea of contrasting between national and the transnational dimension of science in general, maybe points in this direction. And well, if there is times curiosity, did you ever think about the comparison with other missions? I was thinking about the missions of measuring the magnetic field around the world at the time, or in other situations like what happened to Belzoni when he was sent to look after in other regions there. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alessio. So now we have collected the questions on the first round. Sorry. So Rasmus, and we link the comments by Pierre Bruno and your last question. Rasmus, thanks a lot for your insights, and all of you put in better words than myself the conclusions, I would say. The link with cultural diplomacy. First, we have to know that it was a contested issue, and it still is. The science attachés, when they were science attachés from the 50s, 60s, have most of the time been under the leadership or direction of a counselor for culture and science. And it has always, I don't want to generalize, but the relationship is not so easy. There are frictions between the cultural approach and the scientific approach. Fabre de la Ripelle, the one who was sent in Japan, was the first one to reach the status of a counselor for science, independent. Why? To be independent from the counselor for culture. So many tensions and frictions at local level, even if seen from Paris, it goes hands in hands. And that's true that both are promoting French, both are promoting common values, etc. But in practice, they wanted their own money, their own lines of actions, etc. And on your point as on French as an alternative to English in a global perspective, historians nowadays are talking about the first globalization as a Anglo-balization. Anglo-balization, it's the notion, and more recently even the French scholars have proposed the notion of Franco-balization. So just what you said, as an alternative way since the 19th century to organize global exchanges, and with language as a key element in it. So I should put all of this in this Franco-balization context, you're right. And I should insist more on imperialism. It's a word that I haven't pronounced, and that's really problematic. Formal or informal imperialism was part of Franco-balization and part of these scientific endeavors abroad, sure. The host countries, I don't know about how they were received, these scientists abroad. What I know from Japan, again, is that Japan was the first mover. Japan sent first a scientific attaché to Paris, and then France, as a response, it's a matter of reciprocity, found that it was interesting to send someone in Japan. So sometimes the Western countries are not the first movers in this case. Your question was about the choice of science attachés. So in the 19th century, no science attaché. In the first half of the 20th century, no science attaché. Science attaché started, for the French case, from the late 50s. So the choice of these people, that's a question. The choice of the state-sponsored scientist in mission, it's another issue. Two different group of people, two different issues. Okay, so this scientific in mission, with a governmental mission, there was a commission set up in Paris with the head of the Sorbonne, the head of the Museum of Natural History, the head of the Académie des Sciences, and also the Foreign Affairs Ministry in the commission. And they received proposals from people, individual or sometimes teams. We would like to have sponsored to go to Peru because we think it's important to know better Peru. It's an ancient civilization, but it's also business opportunities. We have to know better the geography. We have to know better. In China, we are opening China, but we should know better the Chinese people, their history, their language, etc. We want to know, but it is useful. So they convince the state apparatus of the relevance of knowledge for power. And the choice was yes, processed, yes, through a committee. Yeah. Last but not least, your question, Alessio, why this friction? Why the French Foreign Affairs did not want to have science attachés in their embassies? The response was that it was not possible to have someone travel out of the embassy with the title of an ambassador, of a member of the diplomatic mission. That's a matter of location, of control of this guy. And in detail, in practice, I found that many travelers, scientific travelers, those people with the stamp from the government, they caused many problems to the diplomats because they did silly things, or they had troubles with the population, local population, excavating here and there, and then it makes a problem, it becomes an issue. So this is why they wanted to have them in-house or no, or no one, nobody, under control. So it was a matter of helping the scientists, but also frictions.
Okay, we have a last question by Mihase Christensen. Yes, can you? No, but came in here, please, let the mic.
Thank you, Leonard. It was splendid. I just wanted, I will be speaking soon as well, and I would like us to toss all of these things in the air and see where they land, because so many things are happening, right? In terms of dynamics, in terms of political assets and what's happening. When you said globalization, and it's Anglo-globalization, whether it's Anglo-globalization or Franco-globalization, nevertheless, these are paradigms that we are dealing with, right? But at the end of the day, we live on a planet that is revolving around the sun. What do we do with this? Because from my perspective, we are facing really big dilemmas, really big questions, not to be, speaking top down, but we are. What do we do with these things? Is the nation state still relevant with it? Of course, it is the most complex system that we have ever created as a human system, as a human civilization. But nevertheless, it's not working. It is obvious it's not working. But I find ourselves talking about these things without really reflecting back on, okay, what is it that we're really talking about here? How do we solve this problem? And globalization, Anglo-globalization, Franco-globalization is one of those things. I think we have passed the posts. If you see my meaning, I think we cannot even get to the point of talking about these things without talking about what's happening to us as a planet. And that's the question I would like to raise. I know it's not an easy one. It's one that none of us in this room can answer, but nevertheless, I would like to raise the question.
Thank you, Mia. you are raising the question of, well, the Anthropocene, and we are talking about these national interests, narrow, tiny interests, and selfish visions from scientists, from diplomats, doing this, that. And yes, today there is a debate, I think, in the community about resetting or reinventing the science attaché of the 21st century. You have in the scientific.
And who is he representing, or she,
Mhm.
or they?
Well, well, I would say that you cannot abstract from the states. They are still there.
Mm.
So why not trying to have these states collaborate for the better?
Mm.
That's the debate around the science attaché of the 21st century. Shouldn't he or she be targeted just for this purpose, to make the planet livable or something? So that, and this debate is not in the diplomatic circles, is in the scientific circles. So those providing the expertise, the science attachés, they are thinking, well, shouldn't we reorganize totally the system?
Yeah. If I could, may I?
Yes.
Yes, I think we really need to think, again, I'm not trying to be top down or in any way. I really invite us to think about these things as people who are in the room thinking about, researching about these things. How do we think about territoriality? Because diplomacy is by definition based on nation states. Is that the way we should continue? Or should we land on another kind of paradigm where we think about the planet? Because the ways in which we're thinking about territoriality, I mean, we're seeing what's happening in Gaza and, I'm not trying to be political here at all, but I'm just, using that as an example. Is that helping? I would say no. But how do we adopt or land on an understanding and thinking a paradigm that prioritizes the planet, not just nation states?
Open question.
Open question. Yeah, I don't have an answer. I live with that myself. Yeah, thank you. But
Thank you.
it was very helpful. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And but now we must to pass, and thanks to Leonard. Thanks to Leonard, but also thanks to the question and to debate. Also the last. Now we have João Bettencourt, a doctor coming from the University of Bergen, Norway. Why I invited João? Because I think, first of all, is a sort of, an analysis, no? An analyst of science diplomacy for ocean. And he brings us in the present time. And then thanks so much to be with us. Do you have the slide, perhaps?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. We make that. Okay, you have the floor. Thanks.
Thank you.
Well, yes, we have now 40 minutes for João, and you may start.
Thank you. Good morning to everyone. So first, I'd like to thank David for this invitation. It's really a pleasure and an honor to me to be here to share this work with you. I'm going to talk about ocean science diplomacy and also the challenges facing what we call the emerging ocean governance framework. So I've divided my talk in 3 parts.
this one.
Okay. So I've divided in three parts unevenly. So the first part, I'll talk about the governance of the ocean territory, which is to talk about the ocean governance, but from, let's say, from a critical perspective, that is that the ocean is in ocean government, the ocean is treated as a territory. While it is not, it is a medium. So in the second part, I will build up on this to talk about what the emerging ocean governance framework, which is a series of international treaties that are being, some have already been adopted and others are to be ratified. And that is going to, let's say, give some structure to the patchwork that is ocean governance of today. And then I'll briefly talk about some challenges to ocean diplomacy that I think the science diplomacy can be of use. So to introduce the topic of this governance of the ocean territory, I'd like first to say what is governance. So I took this definition as that says governance is the process of deciding, managing, controlling, and organizing a set of activities, practices, people, resources, spaces. So it's a very broad concept, and it is realized in many fashions, but it's basically a way of managing people, resources, and spaces. But here the problem starts, because in ocean governance, this process usually occurs within a tendency to, let's say, to work on a basis of territorialization, which is to say that we basically use fixed area-based zonal divisions of these resources and the space that we want to manage. And the critique here is that this borrows from land and practices of territorial dynamics in land, and that this doesn't apply as well to the ocean. So these ideas that we borrow from land, which are geographically informed ideas, which are named geophilosophies, of what exists in the ocean, which are termed the ontologies. So they see the ocean as a space that can be territorialized, that it can be divided, that can be split, and can be apportioned to several actors. In most cases, obviously, the nation state. And it is these ideas that shape today how oceans are divided, demarcated, and managed. But not also the ocean itself. The sciences, the marine sciences that inform the ocean governments, they are also based on these ontologies of what exists in the space of the ocean. And this is an example. So on your left, you see a map of what is called the, let's see if I can put this, oh, no. Yeah, okay, I won't touch it again. So this is the area. It's the seabed and the seafloor of the ocean that is outside national jurisdiction. So the white shades close to the continents, those are the areas under national jurisdiction. That means the sovereign territory, and also the area where the states have economic exclusive rights. But then there's this big blue area that is under nobody's jurisdiction, or it's under the jurisdiction of all. And so this is the first example of this territorialization of the ocean. So in this case, the ocean seabed, it's divided in these zones. But there's another additional thing and that's why I put this figure here, is that we also zone the resources. So behind this map, there is an ontology of the ocean as a place where we will go and extract things from. And this ontology has been particularized. And this is what I show on the map on the right, in what is called the Clarion-Clipperton zone. So it's a zone that's highlighted in the left. You see that the Clarion-Clipperton zone, which is a zone that's very rich on marine seabed minerals. And so the International Seabed Authority that manages the area and the resources therein, it has divided this Clarion-Clipperton zone in these small parcels of, let's say, land, which are zones where companies can search for minerals. And so this is a particular example of what we say when we say that the ocean is being territorialized. It's being split up and divided into parcels for reasons of two national sovereignty, for security reasons, but also for the extraction of resources. And this creates problems that I'll address shortly, and I will return to this CCZ example just to show those problems. So these landed ontologies in the ocean. So these maps of the area, as I said, they show this ontology that is established on landed modes of designating space. So dividing the land, drawing demarcation lines. But the critique here is that such modes do not belong on the sea naturally, but they have been transported there from the land. And so also, and not only these modes, but also these landed logics of territory making, governance, and control. And this landed ontology and these territorial geophilosophies are an underlying and unquestioned discourse that we find on ocean governance today. And of course, and as a repetition of what I said before, marine science and technologies, especially those of visualization, because we need to visualize the territory to split it, they are also creating the high seas, so that area that I showed, and they are also being used to conserve it, but conserve it as a territorialized area. And so before I continue with this topic, I'll take a detour and I'll show you a bit of a timeline of ocean governance that will more or less set the scene to why this territorialization happened. So I'm going to start with Tordesillas. So in the end of the 15th century, then there is this episode. So I'll go through episodes. So there's the Battle of the Books, and then the Cod Wars, and then finally we'll get to the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, and then to the last, let's say, episode of ocean governance, that it was the creation of this Sustainable Development Goal 14, which is the life below water. So Tordesillas was a treaty that it was agreed by Spain and Portugal, and basically they draw a line, a pole-to-pole meridian that was located 370 leagues west of Cape Verde, and it gave to Portugal all non-Christian lands east of that meridian, and to Spain the non-Christian lands to the west. So, but the treaty concerned the possession of land. But of course, the line was drawn on the ocean. So what does the treaty say about the ocean? So there is an interpretation that says that the treaty does not grant possession of the seas, neither to Spain and Portugal. And what it does is that it creates the so-called spheres of influence that, of course, you as political scientists and historians are very well aware of that concept. And importantly, within those spheres of influence, these two nations were granted rights of stewardship, not possession. So the treaty affirms a norm of marine stewardship more than ownership. And this stewardship then sees the ocean as a protected space. Of what? Of connection. And why connection? Because you see Portugal and Spain, they're in the western tip of Europe, but they were interested in lands far, far away, both to the west and to the east. And so they needed a safe passage to reach those lands, okay? And so, of course, this being granted these rights of stewardship, it opened the way for Portugal and Spain to launch their strategies of domination of these distant lands. And indeed, it marks the beginning of the European colonial project. So about a century later, this episode of the Battle of the Books occurred. And basically, it was a debate between Hugo Grotius and John Selden. Grotius said that the oceans must remain open to all, and importantly, that rights of stewardship should be invested in a community of states, instead of just one state or two or three states. But Selden, he said, or better, his ideas allowed for the incorporation of ocean spaces into the territory of the state, so long as the coastal state, and here I like to emphasize the term coastal, could exercise effective possession. For much of the modern era, so between perhaps this episode and the late 19th century, the ocean governance was a mixed one. There wasn't one particular country that was given rights of stewardship, but in de facto there was one country that, let's say, was that was Britain, that was the most powerful naval potency of the time, that basically was, let's say, the leader of this community of stewards of the ocean. However, towards the end of the 19th century, and perhaps here even before, we start to see these narrow coastal strips of the ocean to be incorporated into the state, into the sovereign territory of the states. However, this will happen as long as rights of navigation remain. And so this kind of leads us to the third episode, which is the Cod Wars. And so the Cod Wars was a series of episodic confrontations between the UK and Iceland that were grounded on the rights of British vessels to fish in Icelandic waters. Because British vessels had been fishing for centuries in Iceland. So I said Icelandic waters, but by that time there weren't Icelandic waters. There were waters, coastal waters near Iceland. So Iceland, in the first episode, it unilaterally extended the territorial waters limits to 4 miles and then to 12. And this led to, so these episodes are just like scuffles between British fishing vessels and Icelandic Coast Guard vessels. I think there was some shots fired across the bows, but it wasn't, it was not more than that. So there was this first episode in 1952-1958, and then there was 2 further episodes in 72-73 and 75-76, and these occurred when Iceland then extended further its claims up to 50 miles. So why? So, and of course this is a time of the Cold War. There is much more geopolitics and internal politics behind this episode, but I would say that the reason for these Cod Wars was the belief that overfishing would occur and it would harm these Icelandic fish stocks. And by 1976, both the UK and the Iceland, to support their arguments in this conflict, they had contradicting scientific assessments of how high was the risk of overfishing occurring. And so this gives us an important lesson is that the timing of this territorialization, and this was an episode of territorialization, unilaterally, of course, but it was an episode of territorialization. It depends to a large extent on scientific and technological developments. Why? Because this was a time where new fishing gear technology was coming into play, and this led to the Icelandic authorities to believe that overfishing was a risk, and that it was actually already occurring in their waters. And so, this occurred while there were negotiations occurring for what was then to be known as the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. And this was, let's say, a pivotal moment in ocean governance, because this was the moment in 1982 where these ocean governance principles were codified. And so it created a regime of sovereign rights and responsibilities of ocean spaces and resources. And it was different from what happened before. That was a question of states making unilateral claims and then negotiating those claims with their neighbors. And so in UNCLOS, the ocean space then became organized into these three types of areas. So sovereign territory, the areas under national jurisdiction, and the areas beyond national jurisdiction. And now, the extent of these regions is determined by what's called the distance to a baseline. And you can see in the figure that actually the baseline is the mean low water tide mark. And so in UNCLOS, they divided the ocean using distances from a land feature, okay? And in fact, if you look at this picture, this is a very static picture. So you have the divisions, you have the bases for those divisions are written there and are all related to land, not to the water, to land. So you have the continental shelf, have the continental slope, continental rise, the deep ocean. But those are all topographic features of the ocean. They are not features of the ocean itself, the mass of water. And of course, the mass of water, it appears something very static. But I mean, I'm sure that all of you who live here around this have been to the ocean, and you know that water that one day is, let's say, in the territorial sea, because it's being moved by the currents and by the winds, it can actually 1 week later be on the high seas, okay? So that's what I mean when I say that the ocean is not a territory, it's a medium, okay? And so, like I said, this baseline, it uses these topographic features as a reference to making boundaries in the ocean. And so in this UNCLOS, so the features are the low water line and the continental shelf. But of course, as I said, this presents the false notion that coastal baselines and ocean boundaries, that they bound water, where in the fact they merely bound the bottom ocean topography. And as you recall, that's where those definitions were drawn. And so paraphrasing Veronica Burns, we can ask ourselves, if can water be bound as land? And of course it cannot. And so, and here I come to, let's say, the core of this critique is that if ocean boundaries are divided around land, and obviously they are done so because to produce this what's called administrative stability, let's say ontological stability, as Peter say, because obviously nation states, they want a territory that is stable. They don't want a territory that's once it's close to the coast, but then 2 weeks later in the middle of the ocean. But however these things are done, the consequence is that they cannot represent the marine communities that actually UNCLOS also claims to conserve. And so this what they call it a conundrum is actually present in UNCLOS in what they call transboundary issues, or as Tanaka says, euphemistically, in my opinion, is that those are issues that nations could not address individually. They're ultimately in the interest of the global ocean community to solve. But of course, they cannot address them individually because these issues move around. Okay. And so UNCLOS, it developed functional approaches to address this mismatch between the legal boundaries, which are obviously what one would naturally expect when nation states are negotiating. And then these ecological communities, these ecological functions of the ocean space that obviously they don't care about legal boundaries. And so, for instance, in the issue of fish stocks in Article 63.1, it says that where the same stock or stocks of associated species, when they occur within the EEZ of 2 or more coastal states, these states shall seek either directly or through appropriate sub-regional or regional organizations, and there are many of them, to agree upon the measures necessary to coordinate and ensure the conservation and development of such stocks. And then in Article 64.1, they say the coastal states and other states whose nationals fish in the region for highly migratory species, and they say species is move around a lot. They have to cooperate directly or through appropriate international organization again, with a view to ensuring conservation and promoting the objective of optimum utilization of such species throughout the region. So while the method of boundary construction construction in UNCLOS cannot manage these ocean functions that are distributed across time and space, because that's what a medium of the ocean is. It's not constant neither in time nor in space. So it gives the responsibility to the states to collaborate in a wide sense to solve this problem. And in particular, it places on the states the onus of devising a scientifically informed management and conservation strategy. And this is one of the things I want to highlight, as this is a conference of science diplomacy, that there are many organizations, international, regional organization of scientists, especially fisheries science, whose sole purpose is to manage these transnational issues. Yeah. And now, so that was UNCLOS, and of course, the lesson to learn is that it was able to solve problems related to unilateral territorial claims by creating this division of the ocean, but then it was faced with the problem of these functional issues that the ocean is a medium that moves in time and space. And so then we come to Sustainable Development Goal 14, which is life below water, that was devised in 2015. And so what was happening is between UNCLOS and this development, the marine environment continued to degrade. And so there was obviously the feeling that something needed to be done. But of course, and also the very important aspect is that between UNCLOS and SDG 14, a series of new issues emerged. So environmental, social, and political issues that emerged that the UNCLOS was not really able to address. And so beyond the logic of sovereignty, control, and transboundary issues that the UNCLOS dealt with, today, the ocean space of today is challenged by the development and sustainability ontology, which is nicely packed into this term, the blue economy, and that obviously includes market-based solutions to global environmental problems. And so today we have this, which is an improvement over UNCLOS, but with respect to the conservation aspect, but obviously there was a lot of pressure of nation states to include the idea of sustainable development in these texts. And so now there is a kind of contradictory narrative of the ocean, which is at the same time it's threatened and vulnerable, but at the same time it's a space of opportunity and growth. And somehow, this is my personal opinion, is that the development of ocean governance frameworks from this point on has been mainly to do with dealing with these contradictions, without forgetting, of course, the geopolitical needs, of course. And so, like I said, this SDG 14 was adopted by the United Nations General Assembly in 2014. It's a global agreement that delivers this 2030 agenda that aims to achieve social, economic, and environmental sustainability. So it has these 17 sustainable development goals. It has 169 targets, so it's a lot of targets. Particularly SDG 14, life below water, it aims to conserve and sustainably use the ocean. So conserve the threatened ocean, but also to sustainably use the ocean as an opportunity for growth. And obviously, here you have sustainable development. And so indicators were created to support the implementation of this SDG 14 and to monitor progress and obviously to inform policy. And once again, these indicators, they come from they come from science, and then they will be fed into policy. And so, but the important thing is that the targets, they have been selected according to their relevance for policy. And they were selected even before these indicators existed. And so we come to the point where, and this is a bit outdated, but by 2018, so the idea was to have one indicator per target, and now, but in 2018, only 2 targets had indicators. And now I think every target has an indicator, but then you have the indicator, but then you don't have the data to actually give a number to that indicator. And so, and here, and again, now I'm going to return to this question of territorialization, is that the SDG 14 targets, they operate across several spatial scales, from the global to the regional, to the transnational, the national, and to the subnational. And as an example, target 14.4, which I had in my presenter notes, but I can't see them here, it is a global indicator of overfishing that is supplied by the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, and is defined as a proportion of fish stocks within biological sustainable levels. So the indicator, as it is now, it covers 57% of the global catch, but only at the global level. There is no data on the national level because, among other things, of course, fish migrate across areas beyond national jurisdiction. So they are trying to measure something pertaining to let's say, an area that is under the jurisdiction of a state, but that thing moves around between the jurisdiction of several states. So obviously you cannot, it's very difficult to measure that. And so while and as I said, the vision for ocean governance has expanded beyond that vision of UNCLOS of sovereignty and control, etc. It's still partially based on these landed ontologies of the national jurisdiction that actually are inherited from UNCLOS. And here I'm not saying that these national jurisdictions are wrong or they should be abolished, of course not. I'm just saying that the ocean needs to be looked at a different way. And it's okay. Of course, states want to have control of their coastal waters. It's for law enforcement, et cetera. But when you look at topics such as conservation, obviously you need to understand that the ocean is a medium, it's not a territory. And so now I'm going to go back to deep sea mining, and I want to give start the first of 2 examples of how science was territorialized, and then how it helped to deterritorialize ocean governance. And so to manage the ISA is mandated by UNCLOS to manage deep sea mining activities in the area, but it's also mandated to protect the environment. And so one of the tools that the ISA developed to fulfill its environmental protection mandate are these regional environmental plans. Of course, there is still only one that is in effect. And basically, these REMPs, they are area-based management tools. They are adopted by the ISA to protect the environment from the adverse effects of deep sea mining. And so basically what the REMP does, it takes this area in case of the Clarion-Clipperton zone, and it defines a series of marine protected areas where mining activities are prohibited. Of course, this is a process that is periodically reviewed, but the idea is to define this set of MPAs. And the REMP of the CCZ, it was actually an initiative of scientists that got together to think about how can we let's say, manage from an environmental protection viewpoint the deep sea mining activities in that area. And so it was based on scientific principles of this ecosystem-based management, again, geospatial analysis of scientific data. And the interesting thing is that the first workshop, that was a workshop convened by scientists, had the presence of diplomats, especially ISA staff, NGOs, and also the deep sea mining contractors. And they all interacted through the development of the CCZ REMP. And so what did come out of this? So to the left, you can see, so in gray, you can see the areas that are protected. So these areas, you cannot engage in deep sea mining activities in the gray areas. And then you can see that and so you have the yellow areas are areas where you can engage in deep sea mining activities, and there are also other areas that you cannot see clearly in the, you can see better than me. And so you see the gray areas, the areas of particular environmental interest. Those are the areas that the REMP defines as protected areas. And as you can see, is that first they go around except for APAI 13, they go around the areas that are open for mining. Why? Because one of the things that let's say that during these workshops that between scientists and diplomats to define these areas, one of the things that the diplomats, and by diplomats I mean ISA staff, they are diplomats, ISA, so sorry, it's the International Seabed Authority. So it's an institution, international institution that was created by UNCLOS to manage the resources on the deep seabed. And so basically what this ISA staff told the scientists is that these areas, they cannot intersect areas that have been already authorized for deep sea mining, because those contracts already exist, they are in force, and there is no provision, there is no legal provision for us to say that no, now you lost this area because this area is to be protected environmentally. So that's why you see that these areas of environmental interest, they go around the areas that are open for mining. But it's only exploration, no? So exploration, so it's not exploitation. It's not for to take out exploit the minerals and sell them. It's to mainly to get an idea of how much minerals are in there. The exploitation of deep sea minerals hasn't begun yet in the area. And so, but again, this map shows this ISA's geophilosophy of environmental protection, which is these surfaces on the bottom of the seafloor that they say they are protected from the environment. But, and this is my point, okay, if you look at the, if you look at the figure on the right, this is a picture of what actually happens when you do deep sea mining. So, and you can see that the impacts, they not only occur on the surface, on the bottom, they occur along the whole water column. And especially you have these plumes of sediments that they rise on the water column, and they not only rise on the vertical, they rise and they travel. Okay, so you can have deep sea, you can have mining operations occurring in one place of the CCZ, and then the currents can take these impacts into this area of particular environmental interest. So this territorialized philosophy of to divide the bottom, to divide the ocean floor and protect some areas doesn't really work, because the impacts of deep sea mining occur along the whole water column, and they move. So it's and I have to say that obviously the ISA is also addressing this issue, but basically up to now, this is REMPs are what you have in terms of environmental protection. So now I have to move a little bit faster. I'm sorry. So the second example is the Bering Strait. So the Bering Strait was the risk to marine life in the Bering Strait were increasing due to climate change and increased vessel traffic. So there was a U.S. Coast Guard port access route study that suggested creating a static navigation corridor to deal with these threats. But of course, this is a fixed spatial solution in a realm of mobility where whales, walrus, fish, ice all move. So this solution was actually dependent on a fixed and again territorialized mode of ocean governance, when actually the things that they were trying to protect move freely around. And so there was the counterexample actually was this Marine Exchange of Alaska, which was a nonprofit NGO that was working in a very different geophilosophy and ontology, because it employed a network of approach. So it gathered data from satellites, from weather station radar, ships, AIS stations, and environmental data to guide the users in real time, saying you can go through this way, no, you cannot go this way, because we see that some biological activity happening. And so this is a different kind of network and ontology where space is organized outside of these territorializing geophilosophies, and it reflects the mobile connection of the marine environment and especially the human and non-human actors that share the ocean space. But this also raises some questions, is that this approach relies on data, and data science is not neutral. It reflects the ontologies, the needs, and the interests of its creators. And this can perpetuate discrimination and biases. And so, of course, the territorialized modes of governance, they are not the magical solution. They can also bring they also can bring, or let's say, if they bring these technological solutions and to problems that are both defined by Western science and policy making ontologies, and here ontologies I mean understandings of the ocean, of course, this will reinforce the existing inequalities, because there are going to be differences in the access to these technologies, the technologies needed to new modes of ocean governance. And so, quite quickly, I'm going to go through now the immersion ocean governance framework that actually tries to answer some of the questions, especially these last question of the inequalities. And so first, so the UNCLOS address marine conservation. So now I'm on your time. So UNCLOS address marine conservation in the perspective of sustainability, so the sustainable use of resources. But now, in 1992, the United Nations Convention on Environmental and Development, it introduced the legally binding agreement that is called the Convention of Biological Diversity. And the CBD addresses conservation in a completely holistic approach, so it looks at every possible aspect of biodiversity conservation. Later in 2010, the CBD adopted what's called the ICB biodiversity targets, and especially target 11, which aims to have 10% by 2020. Okay, so 4 years ago, to have 10% of coastal and marine areas protected. And later in 2022, so very recently, COP15 adopted what is now known the Global Biodiversity Framework, which includes Target 4, which is the famous 30 by 30, that we say to ensure and enable that by 2030, we have at least 30% of marine and coastal waters protected. And here, importantly, this is the thing that I was mentioning, that now it's introducing these new concerns, recognizing indigenous and traditional territories where applicable and integrated into, I'm sorry, this was knowledge, not territories, and where applicable, integrated into wider landscapes, seascapes, and the ocean. So it started to address issues like indigenous and traditional knowledge and inequality. So the Global Biodiversity Framework. But the CBD and its subsidiaries, they applied only to waters under national jurisdiction. And so in 2017, the UNGA decided to initiate negotiations for this new legally binding instrument under the UNCLOS to address the conservation of marine biodiversity in areas beyond national jurisdiction. In 2023, the agreement was reached, and it covers these 4 areas. So marine genetic resources and the equitable sharing of its benefits, area-based management tools, environmental impact assessments, and capacity building and transfer of technology. So basically, in a very informal way, what the BBNJ agreement did is it just took all the open issues up to the moment with respect to conservation of marine biodiversity, and it just dealt with them and made a treaty out of them. So all of these topics, they were being discussed previously, and the conclusion was that there wasn't enough being done to address them. And so the ABNJ, although it focuses on areas beyond national jurisdiction, is actually also trying to put together this patchwork of instruments to deal with that. Okay. And so finally to the challenges. So I've selected 2 challenges, and they are mostly related to the BBNJ. So the first one is the establishment of institutional mechanisms for the implementation, because of course you need to implement the agreements for them to have power. They are adopted, they are being signed, but they're not being ratified, and if they're not ratified, they cannot be implemented. And so the second one is the capacity building and transfer of marine technology. And because this topic, especially, it directly addresses inequalities, and especially to ensure that the states have the capacity and the technology that they need to fulfill the mandate of the BBNJ. And so it's obviously crucial for the implementation of the agreement itself, but it's also necessary to develop capacity where it doesn't exist to enable the ratification of the agreement. And so what can scientists and science diplomacy do in these challenges? Of course, there are many things that need to be done. So from the creation of interim scientific and technical working groups to address several of these topics, especially, and one that I would like to highlight especially is the need to assess the capacity needs of the states. Okay. And continuing with capacity building, we need exactly this global assessment of the capacity building landscape, but we also need capacity to enable states to deploy their own MPAs, and so the marine protected areas, and also marine protected areas in areas beyond national jurisdiction. Because now with the BBNJ, the states, they can come together and propose the creation of marine protected areas in areas beyond national jurisdiction. And of course, there is also to advance the collaborative marine environmental research and assessment projects, at multiple scales. And so basically, I think that my message here is that science is very much needed to make these agreements come true. And of course, as you've been hearing, and we will continue to hear this week, science diplomacy is a tool that is perfectly well to address these scientific needs into this international. And so to conclude, as I was saying, the science in ocean diplomacy must address the needs of the problem as much as the interests of the negotiating parties. And by mean, I mentioned the need to have independent scientific advice beyond the scientific advice that nation states have within their own infrastructure. Science must inform ocean diplomacy on this true nature of the ocean, and that's also one of the messages, that the ocean is not land. And so science can also be the basis of ocean governance shift towards a dynamic ocean management. But of course, this has to be accompanied by capacity building and marine technology to ensure that there is equity in the emerging ocean governance framework. And so I just wanted so because I was hearing Leonard talk about science attachés, and I made up this slide very quickly. So in Bergen, we have, coming back to independent scientific advice, so there is this movement towards the creation of this international panel for ocean sustainability, which aims to be, let's say, the IPCC of the ocean. And the goal is to launch it in the UN Ocean Conference in Nice. And so in Bergen, we organized an event with our own initiative, Ocean Futures 2030, and that was co-organized with the French Embassy in Norway. And so we had a lot of coordination between us and the scientific attaché at the French Embassy in Norway to bring this French scientist, Françoise Gale, to Bergen. She's the one in the middle, dressed in yellow, and she's the one that's leading this effort to set up this international panel on ocean sustainability. And that's all. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, Joao. We have a few minutes, but for some question or remarks. Yes, Mia.
What do you make of that right now?
What does it mean to say that the ocean is not? Mm-hmm. No, so.
And this is not a question to put you on the spot, because I cannot answer that question myself, either, as someone who does research about this. What do you make of that?
So that was what I was, perhaps what I said, is that the ocean is not a territory in the sense that it's not solid as the earth. The ocean is a medium that moves. So, you know, the currents, waves, it moves, and it's also a medium in a sense that it carries things within, fish, pollutants. No, the continental shelf doesn't move, but of course, so when you think about, for instance, these minerals that are on the seabed, of course, in a sense, it makes sense to divide, to create parcels, and what happens within this deep sea mining process is very similar to what happens with land-based mining. It's just the same thing carried to the seabed. But of course, the impacts, and that was I was trying to show with the picture, the impacts, because the ocean moves around and it's a medium and things are transported in it, the impacts won't stay on that just on that area. They will be transported away. They will affect. So, for instance, adjacent states adjacent to the to the areas beyond national jurisdiction, they have certain rights with respect to activities that occur in the ABNJ, because they know that these activities, due to this capacity of the ocean to move things around, these activities can affect what happens in the waters in their national jurisdiction. Okay, so you have to understand that the ocean is not a territory in the sense that it's not very well. You can actually there's an interesting story. It comes back to the days of this big what they call the scramble for Africa. There was this conference, I guess, in Berlin to kind of split the continent up. And so the countries had to present claims to territories, and of course one of the grounds on which you could present claims was effective occupation. And so Portugal, this is probably anecdotal. I read it in a history book, but I trust it. It sounds like something that could happen. So Portugal made a claim to this part of what is now Angola, and the British, well, but there's nothing that shows that there's effective occupation there. And the Portuguese negotiators said no, because 200 years ago there was an orange farm or not, an orange tree orchard planted there, and so they make the claim based because they could plant orange trees in the territory, in land, and you can do that. You can plant trees. A country can plant trees on your territory because you have a clear demarcation, and you know that those trees they won't end up in another country's territory tomorrow, right? But that doesn't happen in the ocean, because the ocean is not. It's a medium. If you put something in the ocean today, it can very well end up in another country's territory tomorrow. So in another country's territorial waters. Okay, so that's what I mean by.
We have now Carlo Alessio.
Very naive. So wondering how much of the organization for the exploitation of another environment like space was absorbed from the existing regulations for the sea.
That's a very good question, and I wish I could say more. So obviously, outer space and the ABNJ, they share this classification. Let me say it like this, as the common heritage of mankind. And so that's one point in common, because they are areas where countries don't have the right to make claims, as far as I know, for space. And so I think that's the most closely related issue. And of course, I haven't been. I follow very sporadically the space diplomacy field, but I'm pretty sure that this issue of territorialization will come up very soon, if it hasn't already.
Okay, and now Alessio and then Rasmus, and we pass to a break.
Yes, thank you. Just a very quick question. I was wondering, according to your definition of the ocean, if there is some analogies or differences with other mediums I was thinking about, like, for example, the atmosphere and, I mean, what happens going through space, where there is basically the same problem of moving things, and if there is any relation between this experience and the regulation in this other situation. Just a comment on that.
Yeah. So again, so of course there is a relationship, because again, when you think about national airspace, it's just this. It's the extension of the bound of the frontiers to the. And so obviously that also brings this, let's say, conflict between territorialization and things that don't respect national boundaries. I think that there are agreements that address this issue, and I think that the issues are very parallel, are very similar. It's just that perhaps the ocean, it took longer to have this framework of governance created around it, but also because there are, well, I would say that it's probably easier to navigate than to fly. I mean, the controls on aeronautical transport are very strict. I mean, you can probably, I don't know, someone can steal a boat and go to leave Venice and go to, I don't know, Croatia, but it's much, and I'm saying this because just to highlight it's much easier, I guess, to use the ocean to do things that states don't want you to do than it is to use the air, because not everybody can just steal an airplane and go flying. So the ocean has.
United States is not even verified on the ocean yet.
Yeah, so that's yeah, that's a topic that has been very much in discussion lately.
Only a last question by Erasmus, and we finish with the break, because we have two other interventions.
Yeah, it's more of a very quick comment. You brought up the Anglo-Icelandic cod wars, which are of course close to my heart.
Yeah.
In my old primary school in Reykjavik, in a place of honor in the entrance, there was one of the Icelandic Coast Guard wire cutters they used to cut the British trawl cables. No, I mean, of course, both sides claimed overfishing, but with that kind of bioeconomy, I mean, there's a strict limit to how much you can catch. It's a zero-sum game. And the Icelanders simply needed to push the English out of that to increase their own catch in a sustainable way. So it was just that comment. Thank you.
No, it's very much it's true, and of course, so my comment is that, so exactly, so you mentioned sustainable way, and of course this happened because the British, they had been fishing in Icelandic waters for centuries. But why did Iceland just started this now in this century? Well, because in my opinion, it was when scientific knowledge was sufficient to inform them that there was a risk of this of overfishing. So that's what prompted them to act, I guess.
Okay, thanks. And we will start in 10 minutes. We make a little coffee break. But before this, our Norwegian colleague will try to search some blackboard charts yesterday. And this is for you, for your trip in China. Came. Because we had started this, I hope, a tradition to exchange some gifts. Thanks, in 10 minutes. Okay, yes.
Thank you.
No,
Very
thanks
very
to
nice.
you. I'm
Very
sorry
nice
for
talking.
the time, but
No.
and also Ambassador Vattani, but call me. Okay, good morning again. We have a last intervention in this morning. We will hear Mihase Christensen in the next session. Now we have Dr. Giuseppe Zoppo from CNR, and frankly speaking, I ask him to present himself because he will propose a very for us as historians or political scientists, apparently a very strange, exotic intervention, but this is our methodology and philosophy, to have several windows open, perhaps too much, but anyway, we will try to launch a new approach to science diplomacy. Okay, you have the floor. Thanks.
Thank you so much. So, as said by Professor Burigana, my name is Giuseppe Zoppo, and I work for the National Research Council of Italy at the Institute for Heritage Science. When we talk about heritage, I'm referring to cultural heritage. So for the quick introduction, I have a background in international management of cultural heritage, so everything that is related to international regulations, project management, both at local level or international level through European projects, everything that is related to the advancement for heritage management, its protection, it's also in its international cooperation. And through my intervention, I hope to give you some perspective on what heritage science is and in which sense it can be relevant for science diplomacy, which are the challenges, etc. So starting with, of course, a definition of heritage science, we relate to the heritage science definition from the International Center for the Study and the Preservation of Restoration of Cultural Property, which is ICROM. It's an organization which is part of the United Nations umbrella of organizations, has its seat in Rome, but operates on a global level. And they define, this definition is quite somewhat indicative of what are the main scopes of heritage science, which focus on enhancing the understanding, care, sustainable use, and management of tangible and intangible heritage to enrich people's lives today and in the future. We will see that there is really a perspective on communities, on people, cultural heritage for the people, in the hands of people. And today in the future with a perspective, a foresight point of view. Therefore, cultural heritage science, actually, when we think about cultural heritage, we think about maybe architects, art historians, and that could be, could sound strange how heritage science could work together. But actually, heritage science, it's a prism, it's a very interdisciplinary field which bridges together architects, anthropologists, archaeologists, art historians, so just to name a few, which already between them have some issues like dialoguing with each other because they speak different languages, they come from different backgrounds, etc. And then you have also to include all the chemists, the physicians, of the environmental scientists that work on heritage science, because of course, restoration of tangible heritage, of work and materials, on biodiversity, all this also entangles with cultural heritage, but also on with science, of course. I just noticed I have to make a, maybe it's a difference that is not understandable by many of you. What is the difference by tangible and intangible heritage? So very briefly, this is something that it's better to clear at this point. Tangible heritage is all heritage that has a material. In many languages, it's called immateriale, immateriel. It's immaterial consistent, so to say. So it can be an archaeological site, a building, a collection, while all the intangible heritage is everything that is bared by human beings, knowledge, traditions. So for instance, the Scrovegni Chapel will be a tangible heritage. It's a marvelous example of tangible heritage, while, for instance, the Veronese Toccati or the glass breeding art of Burano are intangible heritage, because of course there is the tool, there is the, but what is heritagized, what is heritage there is the knowledge of these issues. And so we bring together a whole array, a vast array of professionals, scientists, researchers in very different domains. And therefore, how can this community operate on international level when there's also different priorities, different agendas, points of view, perspectives? Well, I will bring to you today some examples, some key European initiatives that are actually right now in course in Europe, starting from the Alliance on Research for Cultural Heritage in Europe, the ARCHI project. This is a project that is funded by Horizon Europe for a period of 3 years. It started in September 2022, will end in 2025. It's a coordination and support action of 3 million years globally. And it merges, like it gathers together 18 countries. There are more than 20 beneficiaries, several affiliated entities and partners. Actually, this is somewhat of a bridging project, because on the timeline that you see, actually ARCHE integrates in a process of international cooperation about heritage science that started with the JPICH, and I'm here, which is the Joint Programming Initiative on Cultural Heritage and Global Challenge. So in the beginning, and even now, actually, the JPI still exists. It has 15 countries, member states, 15 countries, but there are member states, 5 observers. Its main role was to, one of the main activities it has, now this has gone low graded because of the ARCHI project. But one of the main purposes of the JPI, one of its main actions was to create calls for funding, calls for projects across Europe. So people, researchers from different countries will gather to propose a research project or a project for intervention project, etc. And based on the call, they will receive funding. This structure is now, these partners and more partners have now gone through, confluated to the ARCHI project, which is a bridge to, we will see the purpose of the ARCHI project to establish an European partnership, which is called Resilient Cultural Heritage. And it's mainly focused on the role of cultural heritage in the climate transition. The transition, actually the digital and the climate transition, with the bit of more focus on the climate transition, the green transition. And therefore, these are the partners. And how you will see, we have different, very different also vast array of institutions. We have cultural government institutions, but we also have university and research cultural in the government institution, private institutions, international organizations. So this is also one of the one more actually characteristic of heritage science, bringing together, gathering also on the national level, not only the international level, institutions from research and science and cultural institutions. I mean, it's absolutely normal that, for instance, in JPICH, countries are represented either by the Ministry of Culture or the Ministry of Research, or both. They can be, and this also provides a field for national dialogue on a national level. The objectives of ARCH is actually, to establish this European partnership on a long term, but also to enhance the cooperation of countries, to define a framework in which they could operate together and create, call for fundings, policy actions, and initiatives together, this time with the European Commission, because the European Commission participates, funds ARCH, and would eventually, maybe, if the partnership is approved, will participate in the partnership. At this point, at this time, I don't know if yes. At this time, we are actually here at point 3. We are developing the ARCH's RIA, the Strategic Research and Innovation Agenda for Research and Innovation, which is basically gathering all the partners together to define what are the priorities on the national agendas, of each country and try to define common grounds. And from this common ground, eventually the idea is that on the resilient cultural heritage, on the partnership, these priority areas defined from the SRIA, the Strategic Research Innovation Agenda, will be transformed into call for projects. So they will be called for funding on this topic, then the next year will be another topic, everything as defined by the Strategic Research Innovation Agenda. So it's a very sensitive work that we at CNR are actually in the process, because it's still a work in process, are in the process of carrying out, so to say. These are the visions and mission of ARCH. It has a long-term vision by 2040 to have established a stable new opportunities for cultural heritage research collaboration, resulting in a strengthened ability to respond to societal challenges and improve the quality of life. Again, we see how also cultural heritage also deals with society and community engagement. And also it's interesting in the mission, ARCH will co-create funding actions, knowledge exchange, and capacity building activities in order to strengthen the resilience of cultural heritage in Europe during the twin digital and green transition. And we come at this point to the European partnership, the Resilient Cultural Heritage partnership on which we are working on, and that we hope will be launched in 2026. It's basically an initiative in which the European Commission and other partners, public and private, can commit to jointly support the development of some priorities for the European Union. On the point of view of funding, how does it work? For each euro invested by the European Commission, for each 2.17 invested partnership, there is an euro invested by the European Commission by the European Union. There are 3 types of partnerships, of course: co-funded, involving public authorities; co-programmed between the Commission and private partners; institutionalized, that is based on long-term dimension and need for higher integration. We are a mixture of public and private partners and international organizations. And these are most specifically the resilient cultural heritage goals. It's to have 2 core challenges: to actually develop the limited research and evidence regarding adaptation strategies about the impact of climates on environmental change or cultural heritage. So there is the aspect of protecting, assessing the effects of cultural heritage, of climate change, on cultural heritage, because it's a new challenge. You have to imagine that cultural sites are now being confronted to temperatures, climate conditions of which they have never been before. So this is on a global level. And the need for enhanced understanding on how cultural heritage can inform policies and guide implementation measures. Because actually, one thing is that cultural heritage can be an opportunity, can be a resource to tackle cultural heritage, especially for what it deals with traditional knowledge of, landscape management, exploitation of natural resources, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a shared perspective on this. And again, these are more specifically all the objectives. I will not go through all of them, but just again, build capacity involving SSH and STEM, both domains, increase collaboration across countries. There's a lot of new knowledge, resources, but then also the integration of cultural heritage in climate and environment regulations, both at national and international level. And we move forward to another initiative, which this time is bilateral and is also framed under several others, also the Archer project, also some other initiatives that we will see later on. But this is a bilateral cooperation that we are leading, we are managing between Italy and France. So the core partners, so to say, are public organizations, the Ministère de la Culture and the Ministero della Cultura, the two ministries of culture of Italy and France. But then there's also the CNR for research, the Fondation des Sciences du Patrimoine, which is the Heritage Science Foundation, which is based in Paris. But also there is the Institut Français and the French Embassy, with whom and there we work, for instance, with the scientific attaché, not the cultural attaché. And this is also another, I believe, interesting point to refer, that we refer our point for the cooperation in this sense is the scientific attaché. So in a nutshell, it was launched with a joint event at the French Embassy in Rome, and then with a seminar at the headquarters of the National Research Council of Italy in Rome in September 2022. It's basically, it consists, basically this cooperation consists on regular seminars that are held alternatively once in hybrid form, so with the presential meeting broadcasted online on Teams, and then online meetings. And we try to actually, if we have an hybrid meeting in France, the next time will be in Italy, etc., to alternate those things. And for these events, we gather also institutions, professionals and researchers from institutions in heritage science in France and in Europe, in Italy, sorry, in order to create also a synergy between them, create cooperations, dialogue, also change of perspective. For instance, there are common priorities of some research institutions in some parts of France and Italy. I don't know, for instance, Marseille and Naples wanted to work a lot together. And ultimately, this cooperation also serves for this. So each time we have a delegation, an Italian delegation and a French delegation that also participates after the seminar to visits to research laboratories, research centers, for about 1, 2, or 3 days at maximum. And so by now we have already had 8 seminars. The last one was in Florence in September, last month, actually kind of exactly a month ago, more or less. Have gathered 56 speakers with 50 presentations. We have gathered in our, dissemination communication list more than, I guess, even more than 650 contacts. And it's interesting to see how not only, even though we have invested mostly on a communicational level, we have promoted this initiative mostly through Italian and French challenges. It's interesting to see that there are lots of professionals from other nations that are interested and which are actually quite active also during seminars. They ask questions, they participate, they intervene, which I believe, it's my point of view, but I believe ultimately implies also an interest from other countries to what Italy and France do on the point of view of heritage science. We have very developed research laboratories, very also ancient, antique, long-standing, so to say, long-standing institutions, which I believe also on the perspective of exchange of knowledge, etc., attract Italians and French, of course, but also people from all over the world. The dissemination of the results actually happened through the YouTube channel. We have a YouTube channel, a YouTube area dedicated to Italian-French cooperation, bilateral cooperation on the YouTube channel of the National Research Council, the Institute for Heritage Science. And also the presentation are available on the Heritage Research Hub along with the abstracts, etc. But we're also working on a joint publication of volumes with all the results, all the interventions that have been gathered by both French and Italian researchers that have worked throughout the various seminars of the cooperation. This is the third initiative of which I wanted to talk to you about. It's the European Research Infrastructure for Heritage Science, ERIS, which is, yes, of course, the vision of ERIS is to ensure that heritage remains meaningful and relevant in a diverse and changing world, and uncovers the cultural and historical layers embedded in heritage. So by the analysis of cultural heritage, of heritage collections, sites, it reveals the historical and cultural layers inside of it. What is actually ERIS? What its consistence, what it consists of? It's basically an infrastructure consortium gathering research facilities, world-class laboratories in Europe across different nations, and gather them through a single access. So by contacting ERIS, through ERIS, you may have access to different laboratories, facilities, archives, etc., all over Europe, all over the national nodes that are part of ERIS, of course, not German, but all the partners of ERIS, of course. It gathers 140 research facilities that are organized in 3 research platforms, which is the ArcLab, which deals with archives, so access to archives, historical archives on cultural, it can be art history archives, heritage science archives, history archives, etc. Then there is a network of Fixed Lab. It's a network of stable laboratories, so still laboratories which are in a single, they can be moved, so to say, all over Europe. And then on the other side, there's MoLab, which gathers all the infrastructures that are mobiles, so that can be moved to actually, because, you know, there are some heritage, some items, cultural items that are very fragile, can't be moved easily from one place to another. So there's also a need for infrastructure, scientific infrastructures that are moved to the sites and in order to gather analysis and work on the items. Before moving on, I go back to another slide which briefly depicts the history of ERIS. We recently celebrated 1 month ago in Florence its 20 years, because it has always worked through research projects, so European projects. It has always been funded by the European, by international projects, mostly by the European Union. But now it's approaching, we are at the end of the implementation phase, IP, and we will arrive now at the, I hope, at the establishment of the ERIC, which is a legal entity, the European Research Infrastructure Consortium. Altogether, it has gathered 54 million euros of budget throughout the projects, and has been developed under national nodes. So there is the central hub, which take place in Florence. Here you have some of our provisory bureaus, and then there are national nodes managing the research infrastructures in each country. There is the French national nodes, Italian, etc., etc. And in 2016, ERIS has been declared by the European Strategy Forum on Research Infrastructure as a consortium of global interest. And these are the members of ERIS, so all the partner institutions that are cooperating in ERIS. It's European institutions, but as ERIS is also perceived as a reference institution network for globally, like on a regional level, the European laboratories, facilities for heritage science. It also entertains dialogue with other outside of Europe countries, other non-European countries, with the support of ICRAM. Then, okay, there was a slide that didn't come through, but I'm now introducing the last project on which we are working on. It's ExPoSTEAM, the European Cultural Heritage Open Science Cloud. And its mission is, it deals a lot with the digital transition also, if you want, is to set up European collaborative cloud for cultural heritage. So it's actually a broad project. It gathers 26 beneficiaries. It lasts for 5 years, has more than 50 partners, so 51 partners divided into 15 umbrella organizations. It has a budget of approximately 25 million euros. So it's an important project, and it gathers both the heritage science community, which, as you may have understood, it's very diverse, and also the digital community. So just to add another layer of interdisciplinarity, of complexity to the matter. Yes, it starts in June 2024, so it's just launched. We worked on the writing of the proposal last year, and it just has been launched in June. The objective is to build an open source infrastructure that enables the creation of practical applications driven by cultural heritage communities' needs. So this will be, in perspective, this will be the reference platform for cultural heritage communities, museums, heritage scientists, professionals of other kinds, etc., for cultural heritage. And it also has the objective to move away from an object-focused approach to a more holistic approach to digital transformation. So again, there is this will of approaching the cultural heritage, in this case, the objects of cultural heritage, not only from, from the digital point of view, in the frame of the digital transition, and bring together also, it's also an occasion, again, to gather different institutions, different actors inside, even also inside the cultural heritage sectors, so museums, local institutions, international institutions, etc., etc. With this perspective is like the strategy is to combine existing resource and then reach this resource by tools provided and by the stakeholders consultation and feedback. Also provide the cloud, of course, for community and avoid loss of data, tools, and knowledge. It's important to create that, to say that also ECOS aims also to create a framework also for data on heritage science in an European framework for data on heritage science, generating new knowledge, of course, and strengthening the European research area for the sector. It's developed in 4 pillars. So you will see there's the community pillar, again, very much focused on diverse kinds of community, big museums, small museums, big research centers, local research centers, etc., etc., regional level, national level. the knowledge pillar and also the community, the different communities of digital scientists, historians, heritage scientists, etc. So also these different scientific communities. The knowledge pillar, which is responsible for creating the infrastructure of the cloud and setting really up the knowledge base of cultural heritage. The innovation pillar, which is more on the development of the vertical application and the assessment of the cloud. And the sustainability pillar, that it's also everything that is related to the legal entity and the sustainability of the clouds from economically, socially, environmentally. And then, of course, the transversal pillar for communication management of the project. This last slide is to say that EGOS is actually cascading grants program will allow for testing of tools and disciplines through 3 calls that will be launched across 2025-2026. In February, in autumn, in next autumn 2025, and in autumn 2026. So to conclude altogether, I just wanted to, resume, and maybe this can be also a point of discussion, the potential that cultural heritage science may bring in science diplomacy. We have talked about bridging institutions, communities, from culture and science, bringing them together, making them work together, cooperating in common objectives, priorities, and also ultimately bringing also values from the cultural heritage and scientific communities, of course. There are common challenges across the globe because, as I said, the digital transition, the climate transitions are affecting all worldwide the cultural heritage sites, collections, also intangible heritage, because due to several aspects, it can be migrations or intergenerational gaps, etc. It also relates to international intangible heritage. And so these common challenges actually deal with all countries worldwide. And so there is a good, fertile ground for cooperation, for dialogue on this. And we have seen that the cultural collaboration also through science, through heritage science, can help creating links, boundaries, cooperation between insensitive areas, intention between different political, social parties. But there are also challenges. For instance, the diverse level of infrastructures and diversity in approaches to heritage science, which is also very much culturally biased in some cases. Diversity also of funding, basically, because some country may invest more than another in heritage science, etc. So it very much deals also with that. There are divergences in national agendas and priorities. One priority from one country is not mandatorily and a priority for another country, and this is something on which we have worked a lot in the past few months for drafting a common strategic agenda, research and innovation agenda for the Archie project and for the partnership. And also, well, I mentioned it quite briefly, but the data access policy, which is each country, each regional power is establishing a different format of data, and therefore to possess the knowledge on this. So it's important also to create a dialogue from this point of view. And I thank you very much for your attention. I hope it it gave a complete overview, but still clear and stimulating. And thank you for your attention.
Okay, now we have about 10 minutes for some question, remarks, observation about this intervention. Thanks. But for me, it's very interesting also how it's possible to mark the difference between science attaché and cultural attaché, no? One point. And the second point is, in my opinion, also it's a very nice, beautiful example of transnational arena of exchange now about heritage, but we must remember that sometimes this is transnational arena may be the vehicle for diplomatic exchange or also when we have some critical periods. Okay, but you have the floor for the question. Carlo Bacigalupi.
Okay, thank you. Very interesting. I was curious in terms of heritage of class of culture in Europe. It's a fantastic project, very well organized, very well supported, and really beautiful and actually needed for the mentality in Europe. So sometimes the national countries may be a little bit conservative in terms of culture. Because they have their own ministries of cultures, etc., etc. I know, say nation 1, nation 2, nation 3, etc. So I'm wondering, in this program, are you guys just keeping a profile in which you say we stay continental and we just go straight to things which are completely continental? We don't want to enter in the business of national states, or you have also an interface with, for example, cultural ministries in various countries.
You see, you're talking about the Archie or
the Archie
project? Yes, actually, the representatives, several countries within the Archie projects are represented by their ministries. And when it's not the case of the ministries, it can be, for instance, for Italy, we have both the Ministry of Research and the Ministry of Culture, which actually Arce is also a good, I would say, opportunity for them also to cooperate on a national level. But so to say, when it's not the ministries, it can be research councils, foundations, public foundations, more related to research. Sometimes we have cultural heritage agencies, so something that is related to either the Ministry of Cultural University, depending on how the the conformation, the shaping of that, the organization of that country works. But there are sometimes boards, agencies, councils exclusively for cultural heritage, sometimes with a very huge focus with departments, etc., pretty structured on heritage science. So it's, yes, there's also a plurality, so to say, of a perspective, because of course the perspective of a ministry is not the same of a research council, is not the same of a foundation. This is also the challenge of merging together the agendas, and also throughout the writing of the agenda, the perspective on this agenda. More research, more community, more societal challenges, more environmental challenges, etc., etc. And it's actually, we worked, for instance, with now we had 4 working groups, etc. But in each working groups we had between 8, 11 representatives plus co-chairs, etc. So together was an effort of, I would say, like 40 representatives of different countries and different organizations, ministry, so you can imagine how the work of that was to bringing all together these points of view, priorities, also vocabularies, sometimes way of speaking, states of minds, mindsets, etc. There's this element, of course.
Okay, thanks. I don't know if you have any other question or it's possible to explain in your vision or better in your practice because you are practitioner of heritage diplomacy, you know? We had in our Horizon project inside directed by Pascal Griset, de l'Université Paris-Sorbonne. We had Pascal Butterlein, an archaeologist, and a very special working group about heritage diplomacy and science diplomacy. And also for them, perhaps it was a critical point, but to underline the difference between science and cultural diplomacy. Not only thanks to the use of science and technology as tools for heritage, no? But also to give the idea that they represented another field, perhaps than cultural diplomacy.
Yes, I mean, you mean the perspective of having, you know, science diplomacy, cultural diplomacy, and then there is the heritage science diplomacy. I think that's it works well. I do believe that. I mean, in my opinion, it goes also this way. There's a lot because when you have science diplomacy, then you have cultural heritage diplomacy. There is the cultural heritage element, which is not to be underestimated, which is also deals, of course, with the community, with what is of value for the community. So it's instantly recognized by the community because it's personal sometimes. And we have examples. I don't know, some years ago, there was a project in Cyprus of the restoration of a mosque in Larnaca, in the Greek side of Cyprus, and the restoration of a church in Famagusta. And scientists, both side Cypriots, started to work together on this. But there's also scientific. There was still the early 2010s, etc. A cooperation between the two Koreas, for instance, on cultural heritage. There was a joint survey of the two Koreas, but in general, there is, yes, this difference of cultural diplomacy and heritage science diplomacy, because of course when you allow someone else to work on your cultural property and the other one, there's also the whole dialogue of, I would say these are two layers that go on one in and with each other, because there is of course, the knowledge of each one, and that happens with the cultural diplomacy. We get to know each other, to exchange, etc. But when it happens to, you know, work on scientifically on your heritage, I will, you know, cooperate with the transfer of knowledge, of pools, etc., of expertise from one country to another. Yes, that creates also another kind of boundary.
But came here with the microphone and speak your name and also your university.
Okay. My name is Chiara Ferri and I come from the University for Foreigners of Perugia and I am a PhD student. I have a question for you. My question is, you are involved in cultural heritage and so on. So do you collaborate also with the Italian Cultural Institute, for example, because they used to spread our cultures and so on all over the world?
Sorry, I didn't.
Italian Cultural Institute.
Yes.
Yes.
Institutes, like, you mean, of course, we work with the ministries, etc. But then we work also, for instance, for the Italian-French cooperation, We have involved also local institutions. For the last event in Florence, we have worked with the Opificio delle Pietre Dure, which is I believe one of the most ancient laboratories on heritage of restoration, analysis, etc. in not only in Europe, but I think worldwide. It's one of the most ancient. And
She referred
to something else?
Yeah, l'institut.
With Institute,
Yes.
the Institute for di Cultura.
Gli istituti
Culture is-
italiani di cultura. Yeah.
We're working on that. We are.
But you gave an
we have-
answer with your answer, if you work or not with the institute, the Cultural Institute of Italy.
The Italian Cultural Institutes
Yes.
abroad.
Yeah.
Well, for the moment, no.
You gave us a very nice answer with your reply.
We work with the Institut Français, with the réseau of Institut Français. Actually, in I believe yes. In Rome, we were at the embassy, but for instance, in Naples and also in Florence, we were received. There was a participation on the French side.
Just a curiosity.
No, from the Italian, we're working on that, but no, not for the moment.
Not only a curiosity, a correct question, because in fact, in June 22, we organized in Paris, in the Italian Cultural Institute, a day about science diplomacy with our colleagues, but it was a first premiere. And they have this approach, no? A sort of, let me say, diplomatic approach, in the sense that they see to also the foreign representative in Italy, in this case, or in France. But it's a very nice question, because maybe our cultural institute may become also a sort of platform to debate, to discuss science diplomacy, you know?
Last year, I participated in an event of the Italian Cultural Institute in Addis Ababa. And the main topic last year was the sustainability. So that's why I also thought about this relationship with between CNR and Italian Cultural Institute, because they are also involved in scientific issues and so on.
Of course, that exists. I mean, for instance, I don't know. I talked about the I mentioned the Italian-French cooperation, but for instance, it's not the Italian Institute of Culture; it's the scientific attaché. But ERIS also, for instance, works a lot with extra-European countries through the scientific attachés and the scientific attachés. So they're not in the Italian Institute of Cultures, but still, of course, there is a shared perspective of global challenges. As I said, it's the challenge worldwide for cultural heritage, for culture in general, is this to define the spot of cultural heritage, not only the risks that are coming to it, but also how it can be an opportunity and for resilience, for new sustainable practices, etc. And it's a case, and it's also normal that it's talked. It's the subject of talk in settings of cultural cooperation and diplomacy, of course.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much. We finished this dance session, but also very interesting, because from the first intervention, we had the idea, the image of the several actors, several dynamics, several arena for science diplomacy, and also of the evolution of this arena, no? And today also how diplomacy may be creative or inventive. The last intervention by the PhD candidate from Perus Chiara Ferri proved this with this experience in the Italian Cultural Institute in Addis Abeba, if I understood, by engaging also CNR and the scientific side of the story. Why? Because perhaps this Cultural Institute might be a window, and or better, a door for several for many people interested in science and technology in Italy, no, not. And this opportunity was catch up by the Italian embassy. This is a beautiful, very interesting example. And but the problem that is also we have several transnational challenges. This one example, but the ocean are the most relevant immediate example, like space, but more than space. And also thanks to the remark by Mihase Christensen about this question, we speak about science diplomacy, but by starting from a nation state platform, no? And this was clear in the intervention of Leonard Laborie, but also has remarked Pier Bruno. The research by Leonard is very interesting because is only is on the French attaché, but she wants to stay in touch with the international evolution, or better, the European evolution of scientific attaché. May be a very nice example to bring other researchers from national level. In my case, I published some chapters about the First World War and the origins, or better, the role of these three scientific attaché. And I think this is also a very nice opportunity, bring the history as Joao made in the present time of science diplomacy. Thanks so much, and we will see at 3:30, 15:15 or 15:30. Grazie, a fra poco.